Should we talk about or discuss politics? I'm here to say today that maybe, but maybe not as well. The issue comes down to, can we discuss it rationally, objectively, without anger, disputing, or falling out with each other? That's the question we've got to ask ourselves when it comes to talking about politics. Can we do it in a way that is loving and affectionate, and that you show compassion for the other side? I think this is a really big point right now, and it's probably always been a big point. Should we talk about it if we can't? I'd argue there's a huge danger if we're unable to have a conversation without getting it heightened, where we end up, making someone else, putting them down and treating them in a way that isn't very kind. There's a big danger if we're unable to do that. I realized I didn't notice I was doing this. I realized in the past few months, maybe 6 months, you know what it's like. You go on the news, your news feed. It seems like there's so much to talk about. How could you not talk about all the issues of the world? And some of them are very significant. I just realized recently that the context for most of my political discussions was usually in one room with several people. And what would generally tend to happen is people throw in a thought, and then somebody else throws out a thought. And do you know what I noticed I was doing in the last few months? I literally say absolutely nothing. I feel like I don't want to engage in this on any level. I have loads of thoughts about it. I feel quite impassioned about some of it. But I just don't think it's worth it, because it's not going to go anywhere helpful. I've got to think about the likely outcome and what's going to happen here. Now, one-to-one conversations, I definitely prefer that. There's a lot of recent events, I'm sure you agree. So many political events, and I appreciate some of them seem much deeper than politics, but that's the nature of politics. You're dealing with, issues of the world, and it will involve sometimes, obviously it feels like life and death issues, foreign policies and wars that are going on and all this kind of stuff. But here's the thing I realized, and I have to realize more as I get older: there's always going to be two narratives. And I'm not saying one's more right than the other necessarily, but there's always two narratives, and sometimes even more. But sort of two black and white ones at opposite ends of the spectrum. My concern, and again I've got to check it in myself, is that people are unable, very easily anyway, people find it very difficult to be balanced. That was the biggest concern. So most people I've seen and heard talking about these issues, people lack the ability to understand where the other side is coming from. Like, they just don't have the capacity. They're so impassioned about their own viewpoint that they just can't even think about where the other person's coming from. Where have they got to where they've got to? And they almost automatically assume that they're some war criminal themselves because they have this viewpoint. And there is only one narrative. And whenever we're in that position, and that's one of the reasons why I've stopped having the conversations, is it's a waste of time. If the other person doesn't have the capacity to hear an opposing viewpoint without getting irate about it, then I don't have the conversation. Whether it be online apologetics about God, the Bible, the minute I see that they don't have that ability, then I don't have the conversation. I have to have the ability myself. I'm not saying it's always easy. Israel and Gaza, my goodness, Russia, Ukraine, the conflict, conservative, Republican, political British politics, my goodness, recent leaders, Trump has been voted in. My goodness, there are so many views and concerns that we have. But like I say, I really value, as time's moving on, just balance and being able to see things from another person's point of view for the sake of a conversation. Otherwise, it's just a diatribe, a rant from one person to another that always ends up going the same way. The few things I want to say today is we need to understand our triggers, understand the things that are emotional for us. For me, bullying is a huge one whenever one person seems to be victimizing another. But again, there's always going to be two narratives to that. And it always depends on what way you see the narrative. There's always two stories to that. Again, interesting situation the other day. I was up watching my daughter playing football, and it's the first time I'd seen her, and she's feeling a bit funny about playing football. So I was up watching her, and the whole way through the game I thought, my daughter's still got her coat on, but the rest of the team aren't. They're in their bibs for the football game. And then I noticed she put her bib over her coat, and I was like, what's she doing? And then I was like, she had her hands in the pockets the whole time I was watching her. And I came away, I was like, I was almost a bit discouraged about speaking to her after the game was finished, because I was like, she didn't give her heart at all. At least run and take your hands out of your pockets, I felt like that. Whenever she got over to me, the girl I'd been watching that wasn't playing very well came running past me, and even though she had the same coat on, the same hair colour, it wasn't my daughter. I've been watching the wrong person for like 15 minutes, and it wasn't her. I was so relieved, and I'm nothing against that other girl. I'm sure she's all her major talents, and maybe she's not feeling well. Who knows? Two sides to the story. You just don't know, right? Anyway, so I realised I was glad my daughter had a better game. She had other issues in the game, but that was a different issue. We have to keep in mind that we do see things from a different vantage point, and sometimes we can just be wrong. How did Jesus and his followers deal with the corrupt and unjust Roman Empire? A repressive pagan governments. How did they deal with it? How often do we hear them talking about that oppressive Roman government that were putting people to death that they shouldn't be? We're narcissists in charge. We don't hear it much. Excuse me, the main goal they had was to preach the gospel. So just a few things to say on the back of this scripture. Proverbs 18 verse 17, in a lawsuit the first to speak seems right until someone comes forward and cross-examines them. The first person you hear often seems right. This is why you're in echo chambers where you meet people who have one view, and very often the whole family have the same view. The whole community has the same view. And you're like, is it just a coincidence that the culture, the group of people that you hang around with all have the same viewpoint? It's healthy to hang out with people that don't have the same view as you and have the ability to have a conversation. I think I realised this myself. It's very, very important. On the back of Proverbs 18:17, the first person seems right that airs their view. People have different points of view. Here's just 4 things I had down here. Assume there's more to their story if they have their point of view, right? Where are they coming from? Assume there's more to the story. Second thing, listen to their side. Again, just hear it out, first of all. Ask questions, and then offer your conclusions humbly as a just general guide for conversations. Assume there's more to the story, listen to their side, ask questions, and then offer your conclusions in a humble way. It's not just I'm right and that's it, even though there's a lot at stake, and that's why it gets impassioned, right? So just a couple of things to look out for that I realize that are really important in having discussions with politics, because it may not be wise if we can't have the things I've talked about, but if you can, here's the thing. Also just watch out for how much you're actually watching politics, how much you're watching discussions and debates in the Senate and issues about the war. And obviously last week was the big Oval Office incident with Zelensky and Vance and Trump, and a really, really, really strange situation. Many viewpoints on that. I couldn't quite believe how distinctly different people's ways of seeing that were. But I got to get the opposite viewpoint to mine and see where they're coming from. You know, I've changed my views on things. That's another important point. Can we change our views on things? My own views on the whole Israel-Gaza thing changed a little bit over time. It's fluctuating depending on what I'm seeing played out, because I'm not an expert. So it fluctuates and changes. I can't just assume the other side are automatically heretical, maniacs who just want everybody to be killed, because that's usually not the case. But here's the last thing to finish with. What is our priority? Should be the gospel, right? What's our priority? What are you most passionate about? It should be the gospel, more so than their political viewpoints or the consequences of your viewpoints or other people who oppose your viewpoints. The most passionate thing we should have is to preach the gospel.